Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today we are going to be making some underwater watercolor paintings. As you may know, a few years ago I spent the summer creating ocean and tropical themed watercolor paintings, and since then I have changed up some of the paints that I used. I feel like I have improved quite a bit on my painting techniques and methods, and I just wanted to kind of come back to those paintings and make some more this summer. Probably not as many as I did before, since I did end up completing, I believe, over 80 panels that summer, but I wanted to come back and paint some more tropical things that I haven't really been putting on canvas lately and have more just been creating in my sketchbook, and see how they've improved and changed, and also paint some things that I didn't paint before. One of those things was shells, just because I was having a hard time really having them look the way that I wanted, and I ended up focusing more on turtles, rays, and sometimes squid, and then just landscape paintings. I had also painted some whales and other underwater creatures, but I have a little list of things that I either didn't paint at all or I hardly painted at all that I want to practice painting this summer and create panels with those things on them. This video is a little bit later than I had originally planned to have it, just because I had a painting that I wanted to finish, but that also means that this video is longer than normal. I usually try to keep my videos around like 10 to 12 minutes, just because I feel like that's long enough that it's not too fast and you're not skipping over too much, but also it's not so long that it gets boring. But for this one, I had a canvas that I really wanted to include the entire process, or as much of the process as I had recorded in this video, so it's a little bit longer than usual. And since this video was recorded over about 2.5 or maybe 3 weeks, I did switch what I was using for recording a few times. So for a while I was using my phone, and then I switched to recording with my Sony ZV-1. And then of course I was painting on different days, so the lighting is a little bit different, the angles might be a little bit different. And I did not record the entire process from start to finish in one recording. So sometimes I would take a break from recording and paint for a little bit without recording that, and then I would come back and record some more. That did help make this video a little bit shorter, but sometimes if you see things kind of like skipping around, or if you're like, wait, I don't remember you painting that, that is why, just to kind of help make it a little bit shorter of a video. This particular panel, the shell is based off of a spindle seashell, and I didn't quite like how it was turning out, so I adjusted it a few times, still didn't love it, so I ended up deciding to add some little bit of a seaweed grass, a corner of another shell, and then over on this other side where you see me working right now, I erased some of the water, which with these panels you can do just by getting it wet and then kind of wiping it up with a washcloth or even a wet wipe, and then I tried to add a little bit of tannish yellow to kind of show a little bit of sand. After that, I decided I should have some sort of plan in mind for my panels, so I made some sketches in my sketchbook using my watercolors, and then from there I used that as inspiration for some new canvas panels. This first one I was enjoying until I got to the seaweed part, which you'll see here in a minute. There was something going on with the coating on this panel, and it made a weird texture in the paint, and it was almost bubbly, and I could not figure out why it was doing that. It was drying weirdly, and overall I just had a hard time with this canvas just because of whatever happened with the coating and how that was turning out. So this one might actually, this is probably my least favorite painting that I made in these couple weeks, but I do really like how the details on this pink fan coral turned out. I really liked the texture and the contrast that I end up putting on towards the end, so I did use that as inspiration later when I was working on my larger panel. Also, a little bit of a side note, I realized that you guys are technically watching this upside down, but when I was editing the footage, I couldn't decide if I wanted to leave it like this is how my camera was viewing it, or if I wanted to flip it so you could see it from the same side as I was seeing while I was painting, but it just didn't look right when I flipped it, so it is going to be kind of like sideways upside down for a while. But later I did get a different method of mounting my tripod and like the angle that I had it over my canvas, so later you will be seeing my paintings the correct way up, and that's probably how I'm going to record from now on. A lot of my other videos I had recorded in our office, so I was on a little It's not actually a desk, it's like a set of drawers, and I could have my tripod set up a different way on there so you can see directly flat from overhead, but I was doing these in our living room. So originally I was actually sitting on the floor, and that's part of why the angle's a little weird, and then I kind of moved things around and got a little bit of a different setup. So I will fix that angle later in this video, and hopefully I will not be filming at this angle again for future videos, but just because of where and how I was working on paintings, that's just kind of how the angle turned out. Sorry if that's a little bit weird, and thanks for still watching anyway. This is when I started to realize that this canvas wasn't working very well, so I switched over to this other one, which I had actually already started off camera, and this one I wanted to focus on some starfish because I haven't really painted those before. This might sound really silly, but for some reason I had a hard time painting starfish back when I was doing all of my tropical paintings a couple years ago. They're not actually true stars, so they're kind of like weirdly proportioned and they have weird little wiggly shapes. So I kind of overthink if they look enough like a star, but also without looking like a fake star, which might not make any sense. But I just had a hard time balancing having them look organic and realistic and also keeping them still in a star shape that was recognizable as a starfish, because depending on the species of starfish, they can very easily start to just look like a blob if you're not careful. This canvas is where I really started having fun with playing around with all of the different kinds of coral and fish that were inspiring what I was painting. Obviously, they're not completely accurate, and maybe all of the things that I was inspired by wouldn't actually be in the same area, but I wanted to kind of fill up the canvas with a lot of different colors and textures, and a fun way to do that was just to include a lot of different types of coral. I also wanted to include some cute little fish, and to make sure to use a lot of different colors so everything wasn't similar. Here you can really see what I was talking about with the coating on this panel, but I loved these dark pink squiggles on the pink fan coral, and I think that turned out pretty fun even if the rest of it maybe wasn't that great. And then here you can see I was inspired by the same fish but decided to approach them very differently. And also this painting got water spilled on it, and I didn't feel like fixing it, so it's a splattery painting now. Moving on from those smaller canvases, I switched to this big 16 by 20 inch canvas, which is always a lot of fun to work on, but I also apparently forgot to record any of the base colors, so we're just jumping straight into this green sea turtle that I included in the distance because I didn't want to include just little fish and coral, and you guys know that I love sea turtles and I have painted quite a few, so I decided to include one in this canvas and kind of do something a little bit different with the water and the waves, which you will see later. But for now, I'm just adding a bunch of little details to this turtle, and then I'm going to be painting a lot of coral. I spent probably about 5 days just adding coral to this painting, and it was a lot of fun, and I was going pretty slow and having to wait in between all of the layers and all of those normal watercolor things. But I did have a lot of fun making all sorts of different corals, and again mixing the colors, the textures, the types of coral, and just trying to kind of space things out so there wasn't a bunch of any one color and also not too many of any one type of coral. Although while I was painting this, I did realize that I really enjoy painting different styles and shapes of fan coral, so you will probably notice that there are quite a few of those. Another thing that you might notice is that I'm using a lot of different kinds of paints. If you have seen my Instagram or TikTok videos, you might have seen a video that I posted sometime last month that was showing what's in my watercolor bag, and then I talked a little bit about what I kind of condense it down into for travel. And I have 4 sets of watercolors that I like to use a lot. The ones that are on screen right now are the Kate Paper Co. I also, of course, have my Artesas, which are typically my go-to for larger or more professional seeming pieces, so like large canvases and not so much sketchbook use. And then I also have the Artistro Travel Watercolor Tin. All of them are great. They all have different color options. So here's the Artista on top. Those ones are not quite as vibrant or as saturated, and you have to use a bit more layers than the Kate Paper Co. The Kate Paper Co. is definitely the most vibrant with a single layer of paint, and then the Artistro would be the middle, and the Artesa take the most layers of paint, in my opinion, to get the same vibrancy as some of the other paints. So depending on the color that I wanted, the shades, and how dark I wanted the color, I was switching back and forth a lot between all of these. I have a paper swatch sheet of each of these sets of paints, and I just kind of look at those to decide what color I want to use, how much contrast I need, and then what undertones I want for the paints. So here I'm using one of the darkest greens, but it's really not all that dark on its own. And for this, I didn't really want to be mixing a lot of paints just because I knew I was going to be coming back to it on multiple different days and I wouldn't be able to just have my paint sitting around. So I did mostly just use paints straight from the pan. You can definitely mix whatever colors that you're needing, and you don't have to have this many paints. And even myself, when I travel, or depending on what I'm working on, I will have a little set. I think I have like 10 or maybe 12 paints that I've picked out that are like my favorite Arteza colors, and I'll put those in a little travel tin and I'll just use those. So you definitely don't need this many, and you can mix your own paints. But I figure I have them, I might as well use them and have fun using all of the different colors and seeing how they mix and combine with each other. And I like each of these 3 different sets of paints for different reasons and for different uses, so I really do use them pretty equally. The Cape Paprico, like I said, they're the most vibrant, so they're a lot of fun also to use as a travel set because you have a lot of really strong colors in there. And in general, I really like the black in there because it's the darkest and the most true of a black, and that one's really nice when you want really deep shadows or really hard contrasts. Anyway, we are now to the point of painting the water, and I didn't want this to just be a large, boring blob of blue, so I decided to do something a little bit different, and I am going to include the sunlight streaks, which you will often see when you are underwater, and kind of the light bouncing around through the waves. And then I also wanted to include the darker blue down farther that is kind of blobby and not as stripy. So this was kind of fun to mix those 2 textures together and to figure out how to combine them in the middle where it's a little bit stripy from the sunlight, but it's also kind of blobby and still feels watery. Basically, the most important part for this, I think, is just taking your time, and you can start out with a couple layers and you can always make it darker if you want to. So even if you spend a really long time adding more and more and more layers to get it darker, that's fine, and you can more easily control how dark it gets if you do that instead of just trying to start out with a super dark blue. I probably could have just used this blue mixed with some Payne's Gray to get an extra dark blue, but I also wanted to keep it in the same tone, and then I just used a slightly more green toned blue later to add some more color up towards the top so it wasn't so much white, but then also adding a little bit of different shades. But I didn't want it to get too dark, so I decided not to do any mixing of this blue with other colors, and instead just added more and more and more layers of the dark blue towards the bottom. I was very careful while I was painting this to try to make sure that the lines were going in directions that made sense, so it did take quite a while to get this to a place where I was happy with it, just because I was worried that I was going to make the lines where they didn't really make sense or weren't lined up correctly. So this part maybe took the longest out of this whole panel, although I did spend a lot of time adding a bunch of little coral, but that wasn't really one individual thing, and that was just kind of, I got carried away and kept adding more and more. But this was a lot of fun, and this isn't something that I've done on a canvas panel before, and I think I really enjoyed how it turned out on this panel. And it can be so different painting on a panel versus painting on paper or in a sketchbook, and sometimes the textures are just totally different than you would expect. So this was definitely a lot of fun, and I enjoyed the textures and the way that I ended up having to mix the textures together to make it be soft towards the bottom, but then also to have the streaks for the sunlight. I also included a little bit of a splatter texture in the water, which is something I do on some of my other paintings as well, but I think on this one it worked really well to give it more of an underwater, bubbly sort of feeling instead of being a little bit more flat, and it was an easy way to help blend that more blobby bottom texture with the stripes of the sunlight. I did not record the actual sunlight painting process, which now I kind of wish I had. It wasn't anything very crazy. I basically just did a bunch of light little stripes, and then I slowly darkened them until they were the color that I wanted. And I made sure that the ocean blue in the background was very dry first so it didn't turn green. And I basically just used the most vibrant yellow that I have. From there, it was really just adding a lot of texture to the rocks, adding more coral, and then adding details and textures to those as well. And like I mentioned earlier, trying to mix up the different colors and shapes so there wasn't too much of any one color or style of coral or type of coral all in one spot. This ended up being one of those paintings where I probably could have just continued adding more texture and more detail basically forever, and there didn't really need to be a certain stopping point, because if you see coral reefs in nature, it's just coral piled and piled and piled on itself, so you really can just add as much and as many kinds as you want. So I did eventually have to decide that I had to stop and call this painting finished, because if not, coral and rocks and trees are things that I can just keep adding more details to pretty much forever, and it's really hard to decide when enough is enough and when it looks complete and when you have to just decide to stop painting more things. That is pretty much all for this last painting, and I just wanted to say thank you so much if you stuck around this entire time. I know an 18-minute video can be a very long video to watch, and this is quite a bit longer than my normal videos, so thank you so much. This video being delayed a week kind of threw my schedule off a little bit, so my next video will be out 2 weeks from now, and then after that it will be 3 weeks again like it has been. It's probably going to continue being that 3-week schedule for a few more months at least. So the next videos will be July 4th and then July 25th. And I do actually already know what the video on the 25th is going to be, which I won't tell you guys yet, and you'll see why when that video comes out. But I do already have those a little bit planned and kind of know what's going to happen with those, so hopefully those ones won't be delayed. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.